Good evening and welcome to the Monday, October 25th, 2021 Plan Commission and Commission for Citizen Involvement meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Iris, would you please call the roll?
Buchanan?
Here.
Fisher?
Here.
Heap?
Here.
Leek? Here. Pepe is excused. Phillips?
Here.
Stewart?
Here.
Councillor Mabu?
Here.
Thank you, Iris. We have quorum. So first on our agenda tonight is a council update. Councillor Mboop is here. Councillor Mboop, would you like to give us a council update?
Yes, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Not a lot. The last time we met, most of the thing was about the police, the community policing. It went very well. The findings and all the discussion was about how we can make our police better than it is, even though we all feel, most of the people who are in the studies, they think that we have a better police. So we talk about that, but the most important thing that might be something that the Commission would be happy to know, and I'm sure you know, is the Reserve Park. The council voted to adopt what the Parks and Recreation is working on, and we also all voted for a skate park in that Reserve Park property. So there were a lot of citizen input, a lot of comments, but it comes to the fact that we just want to have more parks for people in Lake Oswego, and that's what the council voted for, and we are waiting for more update coming from the planning, because there are a lot of questions about traffic. We had some input from, I think it was Scott, gave them some explanation why, people are worried about the traffic, why it's not on Stafford, why is it behind the field, and I think it's things that the Commission will work on, and so right now that's the brief update that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mboop. Commissioners, questions for Councillor Mboop? Well, just a comment, Councillor Mboop. As you may be aware, I'm a member of the Palisades Neighborhood Association. I also was involved with the Parks Advisory Committee for Rasique. And so I think the community's happy that we're going to see a new park. I think from the neighborhood was expecting maybe a little bit more as a neighborhood park. And part of the concern that comes from is just all the development that occurs around there. The amount of system development charges that the neighborhood pays. There's kind of a lack of a residential, community park where the neighborhoods can gather. And I think there was a lot of pressure, from the neighborhood. A lot of input was being fed in to say, they'd like to see the park fully utilized. They'd like to, make sure that it's something that everybody can enjoy in the city. And so some of the specific uses is like the dominance on, sports activity. I think that was a concern that, is that really going to be focused to one, section of the community that's interested in that, where, there's really no residential park around there. And the other thing that I think was concerning was, we talk a lot about climate change and how, I saw in some of the other park referendums, there was comments about climate change, and maybe some of those referendums that were put together by other folks, they weren't accounting for climate change. But I think part of the concern with the Rasique too is that if we really believe in climate change, we believe that it's getting warmer, and you look at the impact of the artificial fields with the heat, it was really focused on rain and saying, well, it rains a lot in Oregon, and that's gonna, if we don't have turf, it's gonna limit the amount of time that the park can be used because just the rainy. But I think we really need to start thinking about climate change and what's going to happen as the temperature warms. And when you look at it and you look at the injuries related to, minors, you know, when the temperature rises on the field, if it's an ambient temperature of say 90, it could be over 100 on artificial turf. And so looking at, you know, the impacts of usefulness on that. But I think the neighborhood's happy to see a park. That's definitely, it's just, there are some concerns. And the other thing that you were mentioning about traffic too, I think, you know, well, one thing that I think everybody appreciates is that the staff and everybody that's looking at that puts safety first. It always has to be the number one, is what is the engineering and what are the safety principles that are guiding it? Make sure that that's sound. And then the second is, you know, how do you address impacts to the neighborhood? But I think, you know, the staff and the consultants were doing a good job on that. So thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Chair.
That's an opportunity for me to remind the commission that the issue of amending the urban service boundary will be coming before the commission on November the 8th. And since that affects one piece of property, that's a quasi-judicial hearing. And so that triggers the ex parte contact, no conflict and financial conflicts of interest. So you'll be analyzing the movement of that based upon the criteria. So please refrain from receiving ex parte contacts on that.
Thank you, Attorney Boone. Yeah, I guess for myself, that's particularly of interest since I've been involved in the process. So thanks for reminding the commission of that. And thank you, Councilor Boone.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the Commission for Citizen Involvement, general updates. Iris, did we have anybody that wished to make a citizen comment?
Mr. Durkee, were you interested in testifying or commenting with Frederique at the same time she does?
I think Frederica and I agreed that she would speak first and I'll follow.
Okay, so she's, are you commenting on the work session?
I'm sorry.
Are you commenting on the work session on the Planning Commission goal setting?
I'm going to comment on the overlay, setting the Palisades overlay as a goal for next year.
Okay, so they'll be speaking during the goal setting session.
Oh, sure, thank you. So we'll hold off until we get to the work session on goal setting for that. If we have no other updates, then for a public comment, I'll go to the Commission for Citizen Involvement, general updates. I didn't have any updates for the Commission for Citizen Involvement. Is there any comments, any activities that any of the commissioners want to comment on for citizen involvement? None? Okay. The next on the agenda are the minutes for September 27th, 2021. Commissioners, any changes or updates to the minutes? None? Is there a motion? Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Fisher.
I'll move to accept the minutes as presented.
I second.
There's a motion to accept the minutes as presented for September 27th, 2021. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstains? None. Thanks. Next are the minutes for October 11th, 2021. Commissioners, any changes, comments, clarifications? None?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
There's a
I'll
motion.
second it.
There's a motion to approve the October 11th, 2021 minutes as presented in a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstains? None?
I abstain.
Abstain. One
I wasn't
abstain.
present.
Commissioner Phillips.
I wasn't present, so I abstain.
Thank you. One abstain. The minutes are approved. So first on our agenda tonight is the work session. It's the Planning Commission and Commission for Citizen Involvement goals for 2022. This is work session number 1. Public comments are accepted, and we know we have folks who would like to provide public comment. So when we're ready for public comment, I'll announce that, and then you'll be directed to come up and give your comments. So the Commission will review the status of 2021 goals and receive input on potential goals for 2022. The staff coordinator is Scot Siegel, the Community Development Director. Director Siegel, would you like to give us an intro to the goal session?
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair Heap, and good evening, members of the Planning Commission. This is the time of year when the Planning Commission and other boards and commissions of the city begin formulating goals for the City Council's consideration as the council routinely goes into a retreat and their goal setting begins in January. The Planning Commission and Chair Heap have directed that we begin the process at this time so that it affords an opportunity for the public to provide comments and for the commissioners to consider what types of projects or initiatives you would like the city to pursue, and an opportunity to have a follow-up work session in December where you would formally adopt your recommendations or your recommended goals. This year, the Planning Commission made excellent progress, I would say, on the goals that you had established at the beginning of last year, as reflected in the staff report. I won't go over all of the projects that were identified for goal setting this year, except to say that I think you hit the major milestones. Obviously, the work that was mandated by the state or directed by the City Council, the Planning Commission completed. The work on, for example, in the flood management overlay, a requirement of FEMA in order for the city to maintain flood insurance eligibility. The commission completed your work on that, and the City Council adopted the ordinance as recommended by the Planning Commission. Work on House Bill 2001 implementation is another Planning Commission goal. It's an ongoing goal, and the recommendation earlier, actually last year, or 2020, was to establish a middle housing advisory committee to provide input and high-level policy guidance to the Planning Commission and City Council. And as Commissioner Leek will attest, the Middle Housing Committee completed their work. They have prepared the staff's busy preparing the final recommendations from the committee from their 6th meeting, which happened just a week, I believe a week or two ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago, thank you. And so I am pleased to report that we've hit that deadline, and the Planning Commission and City Council will meet together on November 16th to receive those recommendations from the Middle Housing Advisory Committee. There were some projects, just to give some examples of work that, when you do your goal setting and the staff prepare recommendations for goal setting each year, we leave a contingency or some unallocated time, if you will, of the Planning Commission's 20 to 24 meetings that you would typically have in a year, because we know that there are emerging issues and there are things we know that we don't know yet, and projects and direction that may come from the City Council, as there were this year. There were directions to adopt code provisions to continue our support of businesses during COVID. There were other initiatives that the City Council has put in play, including the Urban Services Boundary Amendment for the Receipt Park, which you heard about earlier. So that's just sort of a high-level summary of the way I think you approach your goal setting. You address the programs and projects that are mandated either by the state or directed by the City Council. You have a number of projects or initiatives that you've identified as a commission or that the public has suggested and that you endorse. And then there are other projects and initiatives that emerge throughout the year. So the staff report summarizes that work from 2021. We've also identified some potential goals on pages 6 and 7 of the staff report, which are simply reflecting the work that is ongoing, the work that's mandated by the state, including concluding our work on House Bill 2001 implementation by the state deadline of June 2022, beginning work on implementation of House Bill 2003, which is the housing needs analysis and housing production strategy requirement from the state. And those two deliverables are due on respectively June 2023 for the housing needs analysis. This would be an update to the analysis the city adopted in 2013 as it was preparing the comprehensive plan update. And then a year later, or within a year of adopting it, an updated housing needs analysis, the city's required to approve a housing production strategy, which is really taking the need and coming up with a strategy for how the city, in partnership with other agencies and bringing all of the resources to bear on housing, may achieve its targets or the needs that are identified in that report. And that's a new requirement from the state. Cities have not previously been required to do anything more than identify the potential need and to ensure that there's enough land zoned at the appropriate densities and allowing housing types to meet that need. So housing production strategy is a new one. The state's given us 2 years from this point, or by 2024, actually, to complete that work. We've also suggested, and there's commentary in the staff report about one of the commission's goals from 2020 and 2021, I believe, which was to explore either code requirements or other strategies that would make EV charging stations more widely available. And under potential goals, that would be captured potentially under the suggestion that we include the state rulemaking or the state rules that will result from the governor's executive order for climate-friendly and equitable communities. This is ongoing work. The State Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Department of Transportation, among other agencies, were directed by the governor to promulgate rules that would work toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions primarily. And so our work, or the Planning Commission's scope under that direction, potentially would include, we expect, will include examination of EV charging station requirements and the provision of EV charging stations in the community under, I guess, our purview under the development code, in addition to the building code requirements that are currently in place. Climate-friendly and equitable communities, rulemaking by the state is also contemplating changes in land use regulations and potential changes in zoning that would allow for higher density development, pretty significantly higher density development in targeted areas, which they're calling climate-friendly areas, very creative. But what that means for us is, what we believe it means for us is that we should expect to be looking at our two town centers, the Lake Grove Village Center and the downtown, as those are the regional designations that the state appears to be adopting and picking up and reflecting as climate-friendly communities. And those are the areas where we see the rulemaking providing some direction for these code changes that I'm describing. Those rules have not been finalized yet. They could very well change. But if they are adopted, when we expect they will be adopted, I think by the beginning of next year, that would result in some work for the city and particularly the Planning Commission. Other potential goals, just again looking at pages 6 and 7 of the staff report, annual community development code amendments we put on the docket regularly because that typically comes up, and those are code changes that are identified either by staff in the course of reviewing development applications, by the Development Review Commission, which from time to time will suggest that the staff look at updating the community development code. There may be changes that are required by state law. Oftentimes they're fairly routine and they may be as straightforward as correcting terminology, definitions, cross-references, those sorts of things. But they may also include policy amendments, and that's something that we try to track with the annual community development code changes. Other projects that have been identified or are either ongoing or we have heard from the public that you may want to consider in your goal setting. The Lake Grove Village Center and West Lake Grove Design District standards for building design and streetscapes, but primarily building design. In 2020, the commission heard from the Lake Grove Business Association, who had offered to lead a community-based effort around planning and updating those design standards. And the commission at that time approved a scope and a general public engagement plan around that effort with the business association leading it and working in collaboration with the 3 neighborhood associations in Lake Grove. And so they have been working on this. I know that they've met several times, and although they're not ready to present their recommendations to you quite yet, we anticipate that they will be wanting to do that either later this year or early next year. So that is suggested as a potential goal. The other 2 items that are listed here are more recent developments or discovery. The representatives of the Palisades Neighborhood Association, who I understand are here this evening, have brought up the idea of implementing their neighborhood plan with an overlay zone that would apply to some or some portion of their neighborhood, and I believe they're prepared to speak to you this evening. And the final item, or not the final item, but from the working list that we've developed and is still open, obviously, for input, updating the flood hazard overlay map to include changes to the base flood elevation along Oswego Lake Canal. And this was a request actually from a property owner, a resident, who testified during the public hearing that you held on updates to the flood management overlay. And so I believe at that time the commission noted that you would consider it during goal setting, and that's why it's included in the staff report. That concludes my presentation. We're here to, of course, answer any questions that you may have, and welcome your input and guidance on goal setting.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Commissioners, questions for staff? Yeah, Commissioner Lee.
I have a question regarding the canal and the update of the flood hazard overlay. Wouldn't that be a very expensive project for the city to shoulder?
There will be engineering costs, and whether that's something the city would do in-house or would contract with an engineering firm, I couldn't tell you. I think what the city and what the city manager and the council ultimately would be looking for your input or recommendation on is this an initiative that merits some further exploration, obviously subject to budgetary and other constraints. From a policy perspective, would you recommend that the city undertake this work?
Okay. But
Sorry, I didn't answer your question directly,
No,
there's a cost.
But when we get into it, will we, if we take this on, will we have an idea of what it would cost?
Well, I believe, the council will be advised as to what the cost is, and certainly the commission, I know it's obviously has an interest in this, but I think the council will ultimately be looking for the engineering department's, advice as to whether or not this is something that they can accomplish within their budget. If there's a recommendation from the planning commission to do the work, certainly I think the council will consider that.
Because I guess comparing the Palisades Neighborhood Association, who came and testified and the place was filled, there was
Right.
just one homeowner who came and presented his request. And I guess we have to weigh our time and the potential cost to the city.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Leake. So you bring up a good point. So there's the time cost, the cost of time, staff labor, the commission's time, the community's time, conducting these meetings. There are soft costs, there are hard costs associated with, actually contracting with someone to do this work if that's what it requires. I think if you're looking for trade-offs, we would, based on your input and what we hear from this work session and between now and your next meeting on this in December, we'll come back with, and we've done this before, we'll come back with sort of a workload, loading of the hours, if you will, like how do we have the staff capacity to do this? How many planning commission meetings ultimately might this require? And then you'll be able to look at these projects side by side or make some judgments as to whether this is something you want to do.
Thank you.
I hope that's helpful.
No, that's very helpful because it's a big concern to me how we spend our time
Yeah.
for the maximum impact for our citizens and the people who, obviously, Palisades, they're very interested in doing this overlay, and only one person was interested in doing the flood hazard overlay map. So
Yeah.
Just weighing things, thank you.
One thing I just might add on those two projects, I think are good examples of just how different kind of the resourcing and the project management load could be. So a neighborhood plan or an overlay zone that is largely a community-driven, potentially a grassroots effort, and preparing a recommendation would look a lot different than the engineering, much more technical engineering study that would, but both of those efforts could be happening without a lot of direct involvement by the planning commission until they get to a point where there's some recommendations to present. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the number of meetings necessarily. Certainly with an overlay zone, there could be a lot of meetings. But then that would be extended over a period of time where the public process could really be effective and where the commission would have time to process all that. So anyway, I won't belabor it. Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. If I may follow on to Director Siegel's comments, one of the suggestions I may have is that we look at prioritizing our goals. So if there are trade-offs that have to happen, conveying a priority on what are the goals that the commission feels the strongest in may be helpful. I think as Director Siegel was saying, it's kind of my impression that when we go to like the hard cost and the dollar cost, that's kind of outside the scope of the Plan Commission. Those decisions need to be made by council. But as far as us conveying what we think the relative importance are between the goals based on community feedback and other feedback we get, I think we can definitely do that. So thank you for your feedback. Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Stewart?
Yeah, so kind of in that same vein, when you're able to project or estimate hours that staff can spend on certain things, are you also able to some extent to make those determinations kind of based on kind of slotting things at different times of the year? Because that may also, I think, help us sort of figure out what we're able to do at beginning of the year versus the end of the year. If we know that there's certain things that are going to come up, at the beginning of the year, like you'd mentioned, the Lake Grove Village Center feedback, and then maybe House Bill 2003 might not come up till later in 2022 after we kind of get at least some resolution on House Bill 2001. So just curious if you're able to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Certainly, we can provide a projection, and it won't be all that precise, but it'll sort of tell you, it'll indicate, this work maybe, the bulk of this work is going to pick up during the second half of 2022, as compared to something else that might have a more immediate deadline. We can help with that.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Director Siegel, one question is, I didn't fully follow what you were saying about the EV charging. So is it that a member of the community actually gave input that one of our goals that the commission should be considering should be more charger locations in Lake Oswego? Or was that something that we were just generally saying? I wasn't aware that anybody had made that request, but I think it's a good request.
Yeah, Chair Heap, if I can go to the language from the 2021 goal.
Oh, okay, it's from the 2021.
Yeah, that was a planning commission goal from 2021.
Okay.
And I believe that comes under the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan implementation. That's an action item in the Sustainability Climate Action Plan. So the actual language, I think the language of the goal: review industry best practice, recommend policy or code changes supporting the addition of EV charging stations to more locations in the city. So this was the Planning Commission's goal, reflecting on the Sustainability Climate Action Plan.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think I just wasn't following that was tying back to our 2021 goals, but now I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, and the suggestion is perhaps to address that once we know what the higher level climate-friendly and equitable community rules will be telling us, directing us. I think that overlaying that on the climate action plan will provide a clear direction on what we need to do.
And Director Siegel, along those lines, I'm trying to remember, I think this is related potentially to the climate-friendly, equitable communities rules that's going on, but in the past, I don't know if it was in 2020 or one of the years, was the commission or staff looking at maybe things associated with smart cities? And maybe there was some workshops or something I remember, but I'm not sure. So that was one of the things I was going to say was, reading through the climate-friendly, equitable community rules, when it talks about being smarter about transportation in general, there's a lot of interesting things that are going on under the auspices of smart cities. And I was just thinking, is there anything that we could leverage on have we, as a city, looked at, smart city plans, and is there some maybe broader aspects than even what is being called out by the state in terms of things we could start looking at along the same lines, but maybe coming out of smart city work that's currently going on?
And smart city movement or initiatives can be very broad in scope and can incorporate everything from, land use, integrating land use and transportation to artificial intelligence or, autonomous vehicles, and not to mention electric vehicles and renewable energy. And so there's a lot that could potentially, be considered there. So, I think it would be helpful, if there are certain topics or best practices from smart cities that the commission would want the city to pursue, that to the extent that those would fall under the purview of the planning commission, that's what this goal setting is for, if you have guidance there.
Right, thanks. Commissioners, any other questions? Otherwise, I'd like to open it up for a public comment. I know tonight we have members from the Palisades Neighborhood Association that would like to speak. Iris, if you'd like to call the first speaker.
Frederic Lavios.
Good evening. If you'd just state your name and address for the record, and then also any organization you may represent.
Frederic Lavios, 2450 Glen Haven Road, Lake Oswego. I'm here on behalf of the Palisades Neighborhood Association Overlay Plan Committee. And I'm here to answer any questions that you might have concerning our request for adding the overlay plan for consideration to the 2022 goals.
Sure. Commissioner Lee.
Yeah, where are you and what have you come up with?
I'm a little confused by that question because we have been doing regular meetings and gathered more information from neighbors and really listened to both Chris Durkee, who's here behind me, and I have done a lot of investigation on possibly defining areas, geographic areas or legally recognized areas that need the most attention and protection, and meaning the overlay plan, in addition to talking to neighbors and having regular meetings. And we're also looking at the financial implications, if any, of what this would mean to homeowners. And does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And what is the neighborhood, as you've introduced this to people, how are they feeling about it?
Oh, they're very, very for it. But the ones that are in the homes that are at risk, meaning the older neighborhoods, where Chris and I both live, it's the older neighborhoods that are more established and have more wooded and older homes are the ones that need protecting the most. And that is not all of Palisades by any means. So understandably, there are different values and different concerns.
So will this be perhaps starting in one overlay area and then add others to it as they see how it happens?
That's a very strong possibility, yes.
Thank you.
You know, it really is neighbor-driven and input-driven. We don't want to do anything that the majority of particular sections aren't interested in. We're not either. We're really based on protecting the more sensitive areas.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yeah, so just so that we're all kind of on this same page, could you just really succinctly describe, you know, what the need is, like what generated the need to develop the plan?
Sure. So I live in Palisades neighborhood, the older areas where the homes are 1940s, 1950s, some in the early 60s. They tend to be ranch style. And on wooded, we're especially wooded with a lot of natural wildlife from deer to birds, a great ecosystem. That is unique to our particular area. Lots of other areas have trees and birds and such, but ours are especially developed and older trees and lots of, a good canopy, and it really lends to the neighborhood character. So as developers have been coming in and pretty much raising most of the plots that they have bought, 8 in our little 2-street area, it's changed our neighborhood egregiously, and some neighbors have literally, sun blocking their entire yard now because of the new 2.5 story structure, and landscaping all removed, and lack of privacy. And as more and more neighbors, we're a pretty tight-knit group. A lot of us have been there 20, 30, 40 years, and we talk to each other. And when I kept hearing more and more of this happening and seeing that there was no stop to it, we wanted to try and put a few protections to help mitigate that. Not stopping anybody from building or remodeling, not at all. We're trying to make it, we're trying to preserve our neighborhood character and finding a balance. And right now, it's just demolish everything without consideration to neighborhood character, without consideration to privacy. It's really become pretty uncomfortable.
Commissioner Fisher, I didn't want to miss you. Is there any comments you may have? No, I was talking to Commissioner Fisher. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
It looks like Commissioner Fisher is indicating he doesn't have any comments. Commissioner Lee, other comment or question?
Can I ask another question, and maybe Director Siegel could answer this? Does an overlay in a neighborhood have to have 100% approval or a majority? How does that work?
Right, it's a legislative, zoning amendment, so typically an overlay applies to more than just a small number of properties. It's not something that the property owners vote on, if that's what you mean. It doesn't.
I did know the procedure.
Yeah, the procedure is the same procedure that the Planning Commission and City Council use to amend the zoning map, for example, or the Community Development Code. You may be thinking of like designation of historic districts. In that's a different type of, it's a different type of change that does require actual consent from property owners or a percentage of property owners.
Now, it's my understanding that both Evergreen and First Edition have these overlays?
Yes, there are 8 neighborhoods, I believe, that have, not 8, there are 9 neighborhood plans, and so the neighborhoods with overlays or with unique zoning districts are Evergreen, Uplands, Old Town has unique standards. First Edition has specific standards. Lake Grove, Glen Marie, and I think that's it.
And how long did it take to put this sort of a overlay together approximately?
Yeah, so some of the neighborhoods have adopted overlays along with neighborhood plans. So they did that, they did the process together, and the overlay was a product of the neighborhood plan. For Palisades, the neighborhood plan identifies the need for an overlay or recommends an overlay as an action item, but it wasn't created, so separate process. The best sort of parallel that I can think of is like, let's see, Uplands, recently prepared an overlay zone. They did that with their neighborhood plan. The overlay requirements apply to a specific area within the neighborhood. It's not the entire neighborhood, it's the R10 zone portion of that neighborhood. And they address some issues that are similar to what the Palisades neighbors spoke to you about previously, relating to building form and scale and topography and trees. And so I think that, that process, it's difficult to sort of pull it apart, say this much of it was for the overlay and this much was for the neighborhood plan, but altogether that process is probably about, I want to say 18 months, which is moving along pretty quickly with a group that's very organized, and as I'm sure the Palisades neighbors are very organized, and with staff support. That project did have staff resources and support.
Okay, one more question. What is the difference between the plan and the overlay?
Yeah, that's a good question. So code always follows policy, and the neighborhood plan is the policy document. It is an element of the city's comprehensive plan. So neighborhoods that have neighborhood-specific plans, when those are adopted, they're adopted as amendments to the city's comprehensive plan. And so that was, the question again was...
What's the difference between the plan and the overlay?
In the code.
Does the overlay then comes from the plan?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
The overlay comes from the plan. It's the implementing regulation or regulations for the plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Yeah, Commissioner Phillips.
Okay, I'm going to dive into this. I missed the last meeting. I don't believe this was on the agenda for the last meeting. So from what I remember the last time we spoke of this is that the community had some issues with the developers, how they're coming in and just developing. And there was one particular, the developer was here, I believe, and everybody was upset, and rightfully so, okay? However, he basically said, I did it to code, and I'll keep doing it to code, okay? All right, so what you're asking us, if I'm correct, and I'm asking, I'm not making a statement here, is that you'd like to have something in your neighborhood that says, you can't do that anymore, okay? Some things you just can't do. Is that correct? Am I at the heart of this subject here? Just talking to a developer, best effort, and if I like it, if it's cheap enough, and I'll do it. But if it's not, I'm gonna go do code, and I don't care, okay? He basically said that, okay? So, my question is, what do you want? Who do you want to draft it, and who has to approve it, okay?
What do we want?
Right.
The specifics of that, we are still working out with neighbors and also trying to make it equitable to anybody who would want to develop their land. We're not targeting any one developer. It just happens.
Please listen, I know this is recorded. Please make sure you understand. I'm not stating, all we had was one developer here. I heard what he said. And if I mischaracterized anything, I apologize to him and to everybody else. However, basically, I think he said, we'll listen to you. If it makes sense to me, I'll do it. Otherwise, I'm going to code, and I'm going to do it anyway.
So what is your question to me? I'm sorry.
My question is you're going to put something out, and you're asking the city council to review it. Review doesn't do a thing. You want to change something, Scott, I don't know what it is, that says these particular things, our neighborhood would really like for you not to be able to do this, and somebody has to approve it to make it code. Am I correct?
That's what the overlay code is.
Am I missing something, or is that where we're going with this?
Yeah, Commissioner Phillips, if I may.
I'm sorry?
If I may interject here.
Okay, please.
So I think, as Director Siegel was saying, there's a process that's been followed by many neighborhoods, you know, the Uplands neighborhood, the First Edition neighborhood. And so I think what the Palisades neighborhood is doing here tonight is coming before us and saying they would like for that same overlay process that's been used by Uplands, First Edition, Evergreen, all the neighborhoods we mentioned, many of them, they'd like to follow that same process. And I think it may have been a little bit too strong to say that, you know, you want to tell developers that they can't do something, but I think it's more, you know, how do you work more harmoniously between the developer and the neighborhood, and then what things can be done. So, you know, you start looking at similar things that was done in First Edition. You know, what are some of the development codes that can be added in the overlay that may allow the integration of new development to fit in better with the character of an existing neighborhood. And so I think that's what you're really looking at is, you know, as we heard from Ms. Lavoie here, that it's not looking at stopping development, but how do you blend it together? And I think where some of the challenges are at are in the neighborhoods, like what we heard from, where, you know, they're older neighborhoods that have character. You know, one of the things that didn't come out is that, you know, I'm a member of the Palisades neighborhood too, and it's just a very, very diverse in character, as we had captured in our minutes. It's a very diverse neighborhood type of character. So you have, you know, neighborhoods like what I live in, which was a planned unit development that happened in like 2008. And so, you know, we have HOAs in place, and, you know, it's like more like R15 type of development, very large. And then you have other areas of Palisades that are a little bit older. And so, you know, I think that's what you're seeing, is that you're seeing in the zoning that we have now, you know, you're kind of getting some of that newer type of development that occurred similarly in my neighborhood that was a planned unit development filtering into some of the older neighborhoods. And so, you know, how do you look at, you know, creating some best practices that allows the neighborhood to keep its character and at the same time, you know, allow development to go forward. And it's a similar process. I think the process questions, you know, we can ask staff to answer. I'm not sure that's fair for the neighborhood association. But, you know, we can look at, you know, reviewing the process, and we can also look at, you know, what went well with the some of the existing neighborhoods. The Uplands process, I mean, I think certainly there was challenges, and certainly, you know, you're going to have differences of opinion on these type of things. But in the end, I think the work that the commission did here with the Uplands neighborhood and the overlay that came out of that was very good. So my expectation would be that the Palisades neighborhood would follow the similar process that all the other neighborhoods have.
Okay, I'm all in to helping you get where you want to go. Okay,
Thank you.
And if
Thank
he
you.
described it, if this mitigates some of the problems, I'm perfectly happy to do everything I can personally to help you do that. Okay.
And-
However, I would like to make one comment. I heard about 10 or 15 people that were with you the last time say, we really don't want him doing that anymore. Okay.
Yeah, but here's the question, how do you define that? You know,
Well,
I'm not for stopping anyone from developing their land.
Well, a two-story building, looking into people's windows, was what the main focus was that night. And
Yeah.
that wasn't about we'd like to make it not so happen so often. It was we don't really want that. I mean, I didn't mishear what I heard.
No, and I think that, you know, in a perfect world, sure. And
Okay.
you know, I live in a two-story
Okay.
house as it happens.
I don't want to make too big a deal out of this. I'm sorry if I misinterpreted what the overlay was, but I'm all for you, and I'm all here to help you if I can, okay?
It's not gonna be anything
I'm just
extreme.
speaking personally, okay?
Sorry?
I'm just speaking personally. I don't have more than one vote here. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Leek, did you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Phillips' comments are out of line. It's not for us to sit here and say, oh, I'm all for this or I'm not for that. It's for the discussion and the discovery that will happen in the process. I mean, we're not here to run a popularity show. We're here to devise policy. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Lee. Commissioners, any other questions? No? Thank you, Ms. Lavoie. Iris, did we have another speaker that wished to
Thank
speak?
you.
Mr. Chris Durkee.
Good evening. If you'll state your name and address for the record and any organization you wish to represent.
Yes, good evening. My name is Chris Durkee. I live at 2356 Glen Haven Road, just a few houses up from Frederick in Palisades. And I'm here on behalf of the Palisades Overlay District Committee. I just want to add two things, I think, to what Frederick said. First, in response to your question, in further response, Commissioner Leek, we have the full support of our board, the Palisades Neighborhood Board. This is not a committee acting independent of the board, but we've been in communication and coordination with the board and have their full support. Second, I just want to emphasize that Uplands and First Edition and Glenmorey and the others that Scott mentioned saw that there were unique characteristics to their neighborhood or their portion of their neighborhood that were worth preserving and enhancing. And the positive result that Chairman Heat mentioned is for everyone to see in First Edition, a beautiful, beautiful neighborhood. Well, those are older homes, but in a few years, the homes that we're considering in Palisades, developed in the 40s and 50s, will also be older homes that we believe now are worthy of protection. And that's why we feel so strongly about creating this overlay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners? Commissioner Fisher, no?
Yeah, I just want to understand. I thought that this session was supposed to be, are we going to take on the request for the overlay as a goal? And if it is, then fine. I mean, and then we'll get testimony later when they present specific plans. Am I incorrect on that?
I think you're correct, but maybe we can try to understand your question more, Commissioner Fisher.
It's not a question.
Yes, I think we're looking at, we got a recommendation coming from the Neighborhood Association to add on to our goal, the Palisades neighborhood overlay for a specific area within Palisades. And so then I think the questions that we took on now were just, can we get more information so that the commission understands what the ask is from the neighborhood and what the goal of the overlay is. So we tried to add some clarification onto that, but we're not trying to go into the details of exactly what the overlay is, just understand the request a little bit better. Director Siegel?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Heap. I was just going to offer that you may have questions for the neighborhood association in terms of what their goal or what, how they'd like to approach this. You may have questions for staff. So really, the purpose is to identify those questions. And so when you come back to set your goals in December, you're prepared to do so. So again, it's not an expectation that you would make any decisions about prioritization tonight, but for example, I'd be more than happy to come back with sort of a sample, work plan that would be, an outline, but a work plan that we would coordinate with the neighborhood association to kind of come to some agreement on, like, how would we approach this? How many planning commission work sessions would this involve potentially? Is this a 6-month or an 18-month process? We can come back with that level of information for you.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Yeah, I think that would be useful. Commissioners, any other questions? I see none. So thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Thanks. Iris, I believe that was all the public comments. So I'll close the public comment session now. We'll go back to the goals list. Commissioners, did you have any other questions or comments or any other goals that you think we should be potentially considering for our list? Maybe one question for Commissioner Leek. I know that we had discussed some maybe construction parking requirements. Was that something that you'd like the commission to potentially put on the list for consideration, or?
Yes and no. Only because as I've been involved more and more in the middle housing, anything we overlay for one has to go to the other. I'm just concerned about, as we have a parking structure, we have parking regulations, but middle housing adds a different dimension, I think, to this. And I'm just concerned again that as we densify neighborhoods with threeplexes, fourplexes, cottages, that the parking will be insufficient and it will spill into the neighborhoods. And all I can say is I read the letters to the editor in the Oregonian, and the people in Portland just keep saying, stop building houses and complexes with no parking. Because it goes into these quiet little neighborhoods where it's disruptive. So I guess my answer is yes and no. I don't know whether it's worth taking on or not.
Commissioners, any comments? And Commissioner Stewart?
It's a hard question because what immediately came to my mind is it's a question of timing, right? I mean, without fully knowing the extent of the impacts of what House Bill 2001 is going to bring to us, until we know that, it seems like it's difficult to try to address the impacts of it, you know what I mean?
I understand, I agree with that. And I remember way back when we started on this, Director Siegel kind of gave an overview that he felt the impact would be minimal in Lake Oswego because economics and available land in which to do it. So I don't want to clog up the works with something that is either premature or won't get anywhere. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it potentially could be an issue. It's just hard to know.
yeah.
It's hard to know when to address it, right?
So thank you, Chairman Heap, for bringing that up, but I think I'll pass on it for right now until we see where 2001 and 2003 go.
All right, thank you.
So Chair Heap and Commissioner Leak, I just wanted to make sure I'm clear. When we came to you with the city engineer and we talked about, and Senior Planner Olson talked about the economic forecasts or modeling and the sort of the prognosis that we were not expecting to have a significant impact on the city. It was really about the impact on infrastructure, the city's public facility systems. There will be localized impacts. There is, as I'm sure you've come to the conclusion, through this middle housing work, on individual sites, and for the neighbors of those sites, there will be impacts from development at higher densities than what would have otherwise been permitted by our code today. And that's really been the goal of, I think, your committee's work, is to try to identify strategies or concepts that will mitigate that impact. So anyway, hopefully that was understood at the time when we came to the commission, and that's why we had recommended, and the council agreed, that the city would not request an exception or an extension under the rules because of a system-wide or a system deficiency in infrastructure. But that's all I wanted to add.
But I also kind of remember in some discussion that the middle housing impact on our city won't be as great as perhaps other areas, which is interesting in the overlay that Palisades wants to do, because if you don't have CCNRs and grandfathered rules and regulations, those areas are prime for middle housing. Would an overlay preclude that?
I don't believe that the city could impose a restriction on middle housing that would be more restrictive than single family.
Because you can't put CCNRs in an area anymore.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing we could agree on is that this is new, that it's untested. The legislature's required this, and we don't have any comparables. We don't have any examples to look to. So I think that was maybe your point, Commissioner Stewart.
All right, thank you. One question on our proposed goals was the continuation of the Lake Grove and the Lake Grove Village Center and West Lake Grove design standards update. If we put it that, I guess one thing we'd like to know is, indeed, do we think this is going to come in 2022? Because we did have those discussions, but I wasn't sure, how confident we are on where they're at and if we really see this materializing in 2022. So I guess one nice thing would be to maybe get some feedback from them, just confirmation that you know they see this as coming to fruition, where the commission would have something to look at in 2022. I assume that's the case because I thought they were close from our last meeting that we had with them.
Thank you. I can check in with them on, I'll check in with the Lake Grove Business Association on that and get back to you.
And maybe another question, Director Siegel. How is this year's public outreach process gone compared to what we've done in the past? I think it's been very similar. I think we're getting the word out. Obviously, the Palisades neighborhood has given feedback. We've got some feedback from our earlier meetings, like with the floodplain. But have we, really reached out to the community to make sure that we're really getting, feedback from the broad community, from everyone? Are we doing anything differently, or is it very similar?
Sure. We follow the same approach that we've taken in prior years. So notice that the Planning Commission would begin its goal setting at this meeting. Went out to the listservs that the city maintains for those who are interested in boards and commissions, those who are interested in code updates. I think there's one for people who are just generally interested in planning and building, and the neighborhood association chairs, the business associations, the chamber, and the Lake Grove group. And I don't know if are there other listservs that we send those out to, Iris? I'm trying to remember.
Well,
anyway, all the same, interests that we would ordinarily notify of goal setting. And we did send a link to the report that you have before you so that anyone who is interested could see not only, what the process is about this year, but what goals the Planning Commission had set last year.
Thank you, Director Siegel. I think we maybe have done a little bit more than what we've done in the previous year too, and just that I feel like we're getting an earlier start. That in the previous years, I thought we started more in November and tried to wrap up in December, and at least we started talking about the goals and asking for some initial input. And I think even as early as the end of September, beginning of October. If there's anybody out there that would like to, have the commission put on its list of recommended goals, a particular goal, I just ask for any organization or any association, any individual to please, let us know. We'd like to, get that goal at least on our list to be considered. So thank you to everybody for providing the goals. And then Director Siegel, maybe we can talk about the next steps if there's no other discussion that any commissioners have on any particular goals.
Yeah, certainly. So our next steps from staff is to gather the information that you've requested. I think a work plan or an outline for what the work would look like for the work with Palisades and developing an overlay was one. We'll check in with the Lake Grove Business Association and see where they're at with their work. Let's see, there was also, I think you had made a comment, Chair Heap, about smart cities, and so if there were...
Yeah, if we could maybe flush out and look at, what are some of the opportunities we have, look very broadly at, the Oregon climate-friendly, equitable communities rulemaking, but then, look at smart cities, look at, are there any goals that may align with that maybe some low-hanging fruit or opportunity for the city to take advantage of as we're looking at this. We can take that as an open, maybe to look a little bit more broadly at are there some additional opportunities or considerations we should have? Yeah.
Okay, so if it's acceptable to you, then what I would do in looking and screening, smart cities initiatives for that is that I would focus on land use and development practices and best practices, because there's a lot there obviously in public works and operations and smart water meters, and I'm assuming that that's not something that you're wanting to explore. Perhaps that's something that I know it's something that the city council is pursued and the public works department has implemented, but that would be my suggestion, that we look for land use and development practices that fall under that smart cities category.
Yeah, totally aligned. In fact, if I go back to the earlier discussion I was having with Councilor Mboop about, how are we doing in our land use? I mean, that's where some of that was coming from, was that, I think as we're contained within an urban growth boundary, as we all know, and as Lake Oswego, as we're talking about, even like the house bill impacts, that it's just, we're very limited on the amount of open land and areas that we have, open to do any type of development and take advantage of. And so similar to like, as we look at like things like, are we using artificial turf or are we using natural grass, what's the impact of climate change, heat, and then also some of the things I've seen coming out of smart cities was like, and I heard this in the receipt discussion too, was, well, if we try to optimize the land, some of what we can try to do is look at smart scheduling for the land use. So, can you envision land use having many different purposes? And can you look at maybe if it's like parking or if it's traffic concerns that are in land use, look at, how do you control scheduling? So I know in the receipt discussions, that was part of it to say, there's some concerns with the new aquatic center going in versus the receipt. And so they're saying, well, they're going to look at, working with the school district and the other parks communities and look at, how do you do smart scheduling so that you minimize those impacts of everything coming together. And so, that may allow us to use land more efficiently if we look at some of those, opportunities.
Yeah, so that, I think that would come in under, in a few areas. So if the commission were interested in how the city conducts traffic impact studies, for example, traffic impact studies could consider that sort of coordination of scheduling or operations. If you were looking at parking requirements, parking standards are notorious for being based on, the day after Thanksgiving or the busiest, supposed shopping day of the year. And then the rest of the year, the big parking lot mall is only, half full. So, a smart cities approach would look at that and how can we improve the efficiency of that and use land for higher and better uses. So that's how I would approach smart cities in that.
Sure.
In that frame. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, good. And if there are other suggestions or ideas, of course, that emerge from, the public following this meeting, or, if the commissioners individually, if you have comments or proposals that you want to chair heap, if it would be appropriate for commissioners just to direct those to you and myself.
Sure,
So we can, coordinate an agenda for the next meeting on this, which would be December 13th. And that's our next milestone for goal setting. And that's where, typically you'd want to approve or tentatively approve your goals for the next year upon, receiving council direction or concurrence when they do their goal setting.
Yeah, that sounds fine. So again, I agree with Director Siegel's suggestion there. If any commissioners have goals that they're particularly like to have considered, feel free to send them directly to me and copy Director Siegel. And then also, I'm happy to meet one-on-one with any commissioners if they have a goal they'd like to discuss or if they'd like any clarification. I'm happy to meet one-on-one with them too. Okay, Commissioner Fisher, I'll just check in.
Well, I have, I think the last meeting we asked Director Siegel to ask other, like Wesleyan, how they deal with virtual meetings. Obviously, I have an interest in that. Is that a goal that people want to talk about?
That's a good suggestion, Commissioner Fisher. Yeah, Director Siegel, maybe that's something we can consider. And I think it might fall in line with how do we improve our citizen involvement practices related to land use.
Well, hopefully this is good news, or it'll come as good news, that it doesn't have to be a 2022 goal because it's already on your docket for the 2021 Community Development Code amendments that Planner Franstead presented to you on. And so we did receive that direction to research and come back to you with what other jurisdictions are doing. And when Planner Franstead returns on November 22nd, he should have that information for you. And then that, of course, will go into the code amendments that are scheduled to come before you in, I think, January of 2022. So that virtual meeting concept or codifying what we've been doing with virtual meetings is something that we actually need to advance in the early part of 2022, because I think the state law actually changes beginning in January, and we want to make sure we're consistent with that in allowing virtual meetings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great comment, Commissioner Fisher. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
So if there's nothing else, we'll conclude our work session tonight on the goals.
I have a question.
Sorry.
This is probably not related. It'd probably be very simply answered real quick. I'm assuming the Planning Commission would have nothing to say about any infrastructure money that may be coming down through the federal government, through the city. We wouldn't be involved in dealing with any of those. If we are, we need to start adding that to our goals and plans probably.
Yeah, that's correct. Commissioner Phillips and the City Council did appoint an ad hoc advisory committee to recommend use of those funds. But good question. Thanks for checking.
Anything else? I didn't want to miss anyone. No? All right, thanks. So we'll conclude the goal setting. So next on the agenda, I believe, is other business. I didn't have any other business. Director Siegel, is there anything we wanted to cover under other business or schedule review?
No other business from staff. The schedule update is as follows. Your next meeting is on November 8th. There's a public hearing scheduled on an amendment to the urban services boundary for the Receipt property, the city-owned open space. That's different than an urban growth boundary amendment. I think we've discussed this before, but just so you're aware, that property is within the city and it's zoned parks and natural areas in the city. The USB amendment brings it inside our service area for sewer and water. Essentially, that's what it does. There will also be a public hearing, and this is the first that the chair's hearing this. Tentatively, we're scheduling a public hearing for the city to amend its temporary shelter allowances for commercial uses during COVID. As you may recall, early in 2021, the City Council adopted code changes that the Planning Commission had recommended the prior year, the fall of 2020, that allow use of temporary shelters, tents for outdoor dining areas during COVID. And that was to comply with the governor's then orders for distancing and public health. The governor's orders have been replaced with Oregon Health Authority rules. And so the language in that ordinance, it needs to be amended in order for restaurants to continue to be able to use those tents or those shelters this winter. And that's, so anyway, that is something that the council, this is pending council direction. The council will, I think the city manager's asked that we brief the council on this at their next meeting, December 2nd. And then if the direction is to proceed with public hearings and code amendments, that of course would come before the Planning Commission. And so the prospective date then is November 8th. And I just wanted to make you aware of that. And then your next meeting would be November 22nd. Again, there's a second work session on the annual Community Development Code amendments scheduled for that meeting. And then your final meeting of the year would be the 13th of December, where you have the second goal setting session and potentially a work session on House Bill 2001. I see it shown here as tentative. So that's it for the Planning Commission meetings this year.
Don't we have a joint?
And there is a joint meeting, thank you, Commissioner Leek, with the City Council on November 16th. And that, I believe, is scheduled to begin at 3 o'clock. With an opportunity for virtual attendance if that's helpful.
Thank you, Director Siegel.
Thank you.
You know, one thing I may add is that I think we got information from the city recorder this week that the Boards and Commissions Summit will be held, is planning on being held on Thursday, January 6th, 2022 at 6 p.m. And so, that's for the commissioners that are new. Traditionally, that's the date where we talk about what are the goals that we have, suggested to council from the Plan Commission. The other boards and commissions are also there to talk about their goals. The format's changed a little bit, since last year. I think we usually just pretty much read the goals. And, I think last year it was more kind of a working session to see, how did the different commissions work together? So it was a little bit different, but I still see it as a milestone of, the boards and commissions getting together and at least discussing on what they're working on, what the suggested goals are, and having some discussion. So I'd just like to call out, that's an important milestone, Thursday, January 6th, 2022, the Boards and Commissions Summit. If nothing else, we'll adjourn. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
How come you don't want to come and be with us?
I do, I have